Hey there, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. So today I'm going to be talking about the user interface of the game. And with patch 6.0 essentially finished, and the team already completing the Twitter integration and death recap feature, it's probably time to talk about other features that they could add to the game. So first of all in this list, I think that they should add more tab targeting modes and clean up the current ones. Essentially, tab targeting isn't really always 100% perfect in terms of it actually doing what you would expect it to, so there is likely quite a bit of polishing up work that could be done on this functionality. They should also look into increasing the tab targeting range to about 40 yards, which would cover players' abilities, because right now, actually, there are some enemies which could be in range but will not be picked up by tab targeting. Now, in addition to this, I think it would be good if Blizzard would implement a few different modes of tab targeting to suit people's preferences. For example, selecting enemies based on the distance from the player, maybe selecting enemies based on where the player's character is facing, and then perhaps selecting enemies based on where your camera is facing. Now, they're just three ideas. If you've got any of your own, leave them down in the comments. I would say, though, that especially the one about tab targeting where the camera is facing would be dead handy in many different cases. Now next, let's talk a little bit about the guild tab. Now, the guild panel thing is fine, it does the job, but I do think they could make it a little bit better. First of all, I think that it should facilitate a more permanent form of communication. This would be in the form of a feed that can be posted to, preferably only by officers or higher. Now, this would be very handy for guild management, as getting information out to the entire guild would be, well, great for everyone, and it would ensure that all of the important guild matters can be covered in-game. I suppose in a way it would play out similarly enough to a Twitter feed that only high-ranking officers would have access to. Currently, the guild news thing is pretty useless. The guild message of the day is fine, but it's more just a little toast that sort of welcomes you when you log in. It would be nice if you could just hit the guild button, then hit the, I don't know, guild news feed or guild feed, whatever, and it would just bring up a little panel with character names and announcements that have been made by the various officers. Now, I do suppose that this could be expanded to have even more functionality, but in reality, I think that having basically inbuilt guild websites would be going far, far too far, and it shouldn't really be an in-game thing. So really just something that's good for updating guild members, letting people know what the crack is from the officers, but not really replacing a guild website. Really, as much as all of this stuff can be covered by a guild website, the one benefit of having it in-game is that officers can access it in-game, and perhaps people would be alerted in-game. This would ensure that the information would go out because, let's be honest, some people just don't check the guild website that regularly. Next, let's talk about the Talbard Tab. So, a lot of people like Talbards, and they also do provide some collection gameplay. And I know that they have talked about implementing this feature before, but they're taking their sweet time in doing it, and even with the Warlords of Draenor improvements to bag space, really it's still a issue for many people. So they should just add this in, just like the Heirloom tab, just like the Toy Box, and that should really come quite quickly. I'd imagine that the actual UI elements for this are pretty much done already, and they just need to perhaps work in the back end to actually get it in there. Oh, one last thing. If you are having problems with your bag space, just make an alt, start a guild, and use that guild bank for your extra storage, just in lieu of things like the Talbard tab existing. Next, let's talk about the Transmog Revamp. So first of all, I know that this does expand past just stuff that the UI team could do, but I think it's worth talking about. So back in the beta, Blizzard did talk about a planned Transmog Revamp for patch 6.1, though it would appear that this feature has been pushed back to a future patch, though I do think it's actually quite needed. The current system is very fiddly, between having to hover over loads of little icons in the Transmog menu to find the perfect bit of gear that you want, and then also the annoyance of having basically a second bank to manage. It's just not a very seamless system. Ideally, having a system that operates similar to Diablo 3's would work out quite well. Essentially, you would unlock an appearance once you acquire a bit of gear, and that would be that. Once unlocked, an appearance could be applied to your character. Basically, items would be unlocked on a UI element, rather than having to store them in your bank. So this would again be really, really awesome for your bank space, and it would mean that you don't have to fiddle around with void storage and all of that. Now, in terms of the general gameplay, I think Transmog itself would really play out the same here, but in terms of the storage of your gear and the application of the various cosmetic effects, this would be really way easier to manage. Another benefit as well is that if the UI team does get a second go at making a brand new Transmog UI, they could make it a little bit more informational and just perhaps a bit easier to use than the current one. I mean, the current one's fine, but usability could be a little bit better. I mean, if you were unlocking appearances rather than just storing things in bags, I'd imagine that you would have a lot more in terms of what you can actually select from when you go to transmog a certain slot. So perhaps you could just click on head and then it would just present you with a new screen, a nice little menu that gave you a 3D preview of every single one, a little bit like what, say, Mogit does. Something like that could be pretty cool and a lot more usable. Next, it's time to cover the reagent bank, and while it is a new feature, there is actually a really good improvement that could be made, and this one comes from Guild Wars 2. So the Guild Wars 2 bank is actually sort of cool. It's got a slot for each unique reagent type that I think stacks to infinity, or at least some very high number. So essentially having something like this would be really fantastic in terms of your storage space and your management. If you have a trillion Peace Bloom, that's fine, you just put it all in the Peace Bloom slot. It doesn't take up lots of space, and more importantly, when you go to get some Peace Bloom from your bank, assuming you're actually using that stuff, well, it's just in one nice little place where you can grab it from. It's not spread across your reagent bank in a bit of a mess. Plus, no matter how many different types of reagents you have, there would always just be a unique space for all of them. I think something like that would be dead handy for the crafters out there. Alright then, the next thing on the chopping block is achievement search functionality. And as the game has went on, Blizzard have added more and more in terms of achievements, and when a new expansion comes out, the old achievement categories, mainly for raids, are all merged together. The upshot of this is that achievements are just an unwieldy mess. Hell, just looking through the achievement panel for current content can even be a pain. I mean, trying to get your Dungeon Hero achievement, it's just unwieldy. What they should do is allow us to filter and search achievements. For an example, you could filter by zone and difficulty level, and then also you could search by name. That would really help you dig down deep into the achievements so you could just find what you want to know. So you could just type in hero and that would bring up all of the Dungeon Hero achievements for whatever expansion that you're currently looking at. I'd actually perhaps be more keen in going back to do old raid achievements if it was easy to actually get through and digest the information. Now this next one is a pretty small change, but I think it would be a really nice usability thing. Essentially what I would like is the ability to just click on a dungeon icon on the world map and then be shown the dungeon's map. This is already done by some add-ons like I think Atlas, but it would be very good to have this in the default UI, because sometimes if you're, say, looking through Frostfire Ridge, you don't know where Bloodmoss and Mall Slag Mines is, well, you'll have a nice little icon there so you know where the entrance is, plus when you click on it, you're then brought to the map. I think that just makes a lot of sense, and it does tie in with how the map currently works. For an example, if you click on a continent, it zooms into the continent. If you click in a zone, it zooms into the zone. Why not click in a dungeon and zoom in and show the dungeon? I think it makes perfect sense, and it would be dead handy. Another thing that they should really do is just fill out the dungeon journal. I'm not 100% sure how much work the actual UI development team would have for this, but just get an intern on it, something. There's really not much to say about this, but it's past time that the dungeon journal was filled in. It's handy for some people who want to look through the abilities and stuff like that, but also being able to see the loot for those of us who are not using various add-ons to do that. I just think it makes sense that it's a bit of base functionality because, frankly, it's something that you would expect if you've been playing any of the modern expansions. So yeah, just go update that stuff, Blizzard. Another thing that I'd really like is if they would speed up the garrison mission completion. I mean, sure, the animations are okay to look at the first time, but in a system where we are basically completing hundreds of missions, it really is a pain to watch essentially the same animations again and again and again. Those animations don't give us anything in the way of useful information, and really there's no interactive reason for watching them. It's basically just lost time waiting. Something like the mission completion from Master Plan, or perhaps just a toggleable fast mode that had no animations, would be a really great usability feature. And finally, we're going to end with a pretty small point, but one that I think is decently important nonetheless. I think we should be able to just open all mail. It would be very handy, and yes, add-ons like Postal and things like that already do this, but for many people, that's not the game. They're using the default UI, and it just makes sense for such a basic thing to be a part of that default, especially for when you have those despicable human beings who sell things in stacks of one when you need to buy hundreds of them. That's not pretty cool. Also, while we're on the topic of mailboxes, if you could perhaps load more mail at once without having to /reload your UI, that would be really nice, but I'm assuming there's some sort of technical server-side reason why that's capped at 50, and I'm assuming it's to do with performance. Okay then, so there you have it. They are my 10 suggestions for improvements to the UI of World of Warcraft. Now that the Twitter functionality is done with, perhaps they've got a little bit more free time. I know that a lot of people said that, you know, the Twitter stuff is taking away from development time and it's costing us a raid, when in reality all it would do is cost us time for the UI development team. So now that they've developed that, let's hope they move on to some stuff that would perhaps be of more benefit to more people. Anyway, let me know of any suggestions you might have down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.